The 2026 RAV4 Limited with a panoramic moonroof. Toyota RAV4 is not responsible for the new exotic hairstyle you end up with if you get used to driving the RAV4 Limited with the panoramic moonroof and windows open. We recommend bringing hairspray if you want to keep the look. The 2026 RAV4 is serious fun.
My coworker used to say that the dead would visit him at night. Among them, a very beautiful woman who would climb up onto the hood of the truck. One early morning, I saw her too, right there on top of it. But she was nothing like he described. On the contrary, she was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. My dear community, what a pleasure to find myself with you once again. The stories we've gathered for this episode have something very special about them. Each one takes a different path, but I am completely certain that all of them are going to surprise you. No matter what it is that unsettles you when night falls, whatever you prefer not to think about while everything is quiet, it's possible that somewhere among tonight's stories you will find exactly that fear. Turn off the lights if you dare, because once we begin, there is no turning back. You are already listening to Tales of the Night. I just finished listening to a story about a cult that apparently took place, as far as I can tell, very close to the area where I used to work in Guadalajara. I was there from 17 to 22, before going back to Aguascalientes to finally finish high school and university. But in Guadalajara, I spent those years working to help my mom. My experience, though, has nothing to do with a cult. At least I don't think so. It's something I would consider absolutely paranormal. I used to get off late from the cafe where I worked and walk a few blocks to my mom's workplace. I would pick her up and then we'd take the bus home together. I loved looking at those old mansions that seemed straight out of movies, and there was one in particular that I liked because it looked both cared for and abandoned at the same time. I don't even know how to explain it. Everything seemed in order, but it also gave the impression that no one had lived there in a very long time. Sometimes I would look at the houses and think about what they must have looked like when they were first built, when they were first lived in. Then something started happening every time I passed that house. You could hear someone sweeping in the patio. The iron gates were low, shorter than me, and yet I could never make out who was doing the sweeping. I would pay close attention, but nothing. I even imagined it might be a night watchman using the time to clean, but I could never see anyone. Besides, I had always heard that it was bad luck to sweep at night. After a few weeks, I think, I was finally able to see who it was. When I passed along the main path of the house, near the door on the sidewalk, you could make out a woman sweeping. Older, elderly, judging by her posture, hunched over. She would bend down and seem to sweep with some difficulty. I was curious about who she might be and why she was sweeping at that hour. She became one more detail to think about on my nightly walks. I thought about her a lot, because she couldn't be a night watchman, and if she was a cleaning woman, it seemed very strange that she would be working at that age, in the middle of the night. But unusual customs, I thought. Or maybe she was the owner. Whenever I thought of her, I called her La Jorobada, the hunchbacked woman. And one night I was walking past completely absorbed in my phone. There had been a huge blow-up at work and things were getting very heated in a group chat. I was walking along just reading without paying any attention to where I was going. And even realized I was already in front of her house, and that night the sound of the broom was gone. Suddenly something made me look up. I had been walking very close to the fence, and when I looked ahead I noticed a very long, thin arm reaching out through the iron bars, a little ahead of where I was. The hand was open, as if it had been waiting for me to walk by so it could touch me, as if it were about to grab me and pull me inside. I stopped dead in my tracks. My phone fell. I must have swallowed a scream because I was genuinely terrified. The arm slowly withdrew back through the bars, and I just stood there frozen. Then the sound of the broom started again. Someone sweeping. I walked slowly until I reached a spot near the gate where I could look inside again, toward where she always swept. There she was. And now, I don't know why, for the first time I did something. "Good evening," I said. The woman facing away from me stopped. She went completely still. I paused for a moment, but I was too afraid for her to turn around. I started running. I ran all the way to my mom, and when she saw me looking so pale and asked what had happened, I told her I had almost been mugged. She didn't push it, and we got on the bus. But something very strange happened there too. Everyone on board was silent, not just absorbed in their own worlds, but genuinely somber. Nobody was talking, and maybe it was just my impression, but the whole bus felt completely desolate. That night I dreamed about the woman with the broom until morning, the hunchbacked woman, outside my house, as if she had followed me. She was trying to get in, but something wouldn't let her. In the dream, I thought about all the saints my mom had throughout the living room and the entryway, and I knew in the dream that was why she couldn't come in. I might have dismissed all of it as a dream, but the woman who rented us our house lived across the street, and she told us she had seen someone outside our place the night before, waiting near the door. An old woman. My mom prayed a great deal, and I changed my routine, my entire nightly route, so I would never have to pass by that house again. Hello, Tales of the Night community. My name is Daniela. My dad and I have been listening to the show for a few years now, and today I want to share a story that happened to him. My dad has been a truck driver practically his whole life. He started driving at 15, after my grandfather passed away. As you can imagine, after so many years on the road, he has countless stories, but there is one he always tells with a great deal of fear, because he says he has never felt that way in his life, with the feeling that he could literally die of fright. Since 2022, he started working for a company that makes deliveries in the United States. Over there, a very common arrangement is team driving, where two operators share the same truck. While one drives, the other rests in the sleeper cab. My dad told me his co-driver had something very unusual about him. He had heard him talking in his sleep many times, sometimes as if arguing with someone, as if he were in a fight. Other times it sounded like perfectly ordinary conversations. When he woke up, he would say he had dreamed about dead people who came to visit him. My dad always thought he was just dreaming, and didn't really believe he had any special gift for dreaming about the dead. One night they stopped to rest, and both fell asleep in the sleeper cab. My dad says he woke up on his own just to shift position, but when he opened his eyes he glanced toward the cab and saw a woman sitting on the hood, in front of the windshield. She was wearing an old-fashioned white dress and had long hair. She was looking out ahead of the truck, but she was slowly turning, as if to look back at my dad. At first he didn't feel afraid, or so he says. He just found it strange that someone was there, and didn't want to jump to the conclusion that it was a ghost. Then the woman finally turned and looked directly at him. My dad says he will never forget that face, that she was not a normal woman, that her face looked like that of someone who had been dead for a very long time. The skin was dark and sunken, as if already in the process of decomposing. My dad just lay there with his eyes wide open, unable to breathe from fear. The woman turned her head forward again, climbed down from the truck, and disappeared. The next day, while they were back on the road, my dad asked his co-driver, more as a joke than because he actually believed what he had seen, whether he had had any visitors the night before. The co-driver had been in a cheerful mood, but when my dad asked that, he stopped smiling. He asked very seriously, "How do you know?" My dad was taken aback. "Because there was a woman on the hood." The other man went quiet for a few seconds. "Yeah. That's a woman who comes and goes whenever she wants, but last night she was very angry." Then he added, "Hey, but you have to admit she's gorgeous, right?" My dad cut him off immediately. "What are you talking about? She was completely rotted. They both stared at the road without understanding. They were both convinced they had seen the same woman at the same time doing the same thing. Both of them were certain of it. But while one remembered a strikingly beautiful woman who came to visit them, the other could only recall the face of a dead person. My dad never made fun of his co-driver again when he said that someone came to visit him at night. Even now, when he thinks back to that trip, he says what frightens him most isn't so much knowing he saw a ghost. It's imagining that for some people they might be terrifying, while others let them come close because they don't see them that way. What do you think, community? How have you seen ghosts? Hello, my dear Tales of the Night community. I hope everyone listening is doing well. What I want to share happened in the village where my mother was born, a very small community tucked up in the mountains. I've actually never been there myself, but my older brother has, and I think what happened, what I'm about to tell you, is the reason I've never felt any desire to go. It happened during the pandemic, and I think that's why almost no one outside that village ever found out about it. During those months, as you'll remember, the news was all hospitals and infection counts and daily death tolls. Whatever happened in a remote village simply got buried under everything else. Since I was a child, I had been hearing stories about a mountain a few kilometers from the village. Not very tall, but quite isolated. There was a narrow dirt path that some of the local shepherds used to take their animals up to graze, but aside from that, very few people had any reason to climb that way. The path didn't lead anywhere. My mom says that when she was a girl, the elders, her grandmother for instance, would tell the children not to get too close to the upper part of the hill. They never explained clearly why, and everyone had their own version. Some claimed to have seen enormous lights moving silently across the sky in the early hours. Lights that didn't look like airplanes because they would change direction suddenly and then hover in place for several minutes before disappearing behind the mountain. Others said things also came down there, things that descended from the sky. And beyond the flying saucers, like something out of a movie. Some people said you could also see tall, dark figures walking among the trees. A few swore they had seen them clearly from a distance, up near the top of the hill, just before dawn. There was also an even older story. They said that at night you could hear a woman crying. It wasn't quite like La Llorona. No one ever talked about a woman searching for her children or anything like that. They simply said that when it rained, or when a strong wind came down from the mountain, you could hear a long, drawn-out weeping that seemed to be getting closer, even though it never stayed in one place. Over time, all of these stories got filed away as just old folks' tales, because even in small villages, the younger generations stopped believing, or at least not as much as their elders did. The young people stopped paying attention. The shepherds kept going up with their flocks, and nothing ever happened. Until it did. There was a man who had spent decades caring for sheep. Everyone knew him, Don Julian. He was getting on in years but still made the same trip up to the mountain, accompanied only by 2 dogs that practically worked on their own. People said his dogs were so intelligent that a single whistle was enough to move the whole flock. One morning he set out as usual. People saw him walking with his sheep toward the hill. No one saw him come back down. At first, no one worried too much. Depending on the weather, some shepherds would spend the whole day up there and not return until well into the night. But the early hours of the morning came, and Don Julian never appeared, so a group of his nephews organized a search. Between family members, villagers, and other shepherds, they set off along the same path he had taken. The first thing they found were several of his sheep walking alone in the hillside. That was already quite unusual. The animals normally don't separate from the flock if the dogs are still working. Further along they found 2 more, as if the group had scattered for no reason. As they kept climbing, they began to feel something wrong. That's how one of the men who was there described it. A sense that they were about to find something terrible. A feeling that they were very far from familiar ground, even though they had walked those paths many times before. When they finally reached a small plateau near the top, They found Don Julian lying face up. No blood, no wounds, but with his eyes wide open. A few meters away were his 2 dogs, dead as well, eyes open, as if they had fallen at the same moment. And scattered around were 8 sheep, all dead in exactly the same way. Not a single bite mark, no wounds, no broken bones, no visible cause of death. But what struck the men who found them most was the expression on all of them. They said every animal had its eyes wide open, fixed on nothing. The men went quickly back down to report it. The authorities came up and carried out an investigation, but they found no strange tracks, no signs of a predator attack on the flock, no trace of poison. There had been no lightning storm that night either. Nothing, no explanation. The official conclusion was that the man had suffered a cardiac arrest, and since no injuries were found on the animals, the police suggested that perhaps the dogs and sheep had also died of some natural cause related to stress. That explanation went into the records. Perhaps under other circumstances they would have sent the animals for testing, but during the pandemic, it had already been an achievement just to have anyone go up there to investigate a shepherd's death. In the village, no one fully accepted the official cause, because one thing is an elderly man having a heart attack. Quite another is for 2 healthy working dogs and 8 healthy sheep to drop dead around him at the exact same time. Even today, when my mom goes back to the village and the subject comes up over a meal, there is always someone who asks the same question. People can't let it go. What did they see? Because if they truly all died of fright, no one has been able to explain what could be terrifying enough to stop the heart of a man, 2 dogs trained to face down and fight coyotes, and 8 healthy animals, all at once. They say that since then, fewer and fewer shepherds are willing to go up alone to the highest part of that mountain. And as I said, that story took away any desire I had to visit my mother's hometown. Forever. Hello, dear community. First of all, let me say that I have been listening to the show for several years now. I truly never imagined that someday I would be the one writing in to share an experience of my own. Everything happened about 4 years ago, when I was pregnant with my first child. As happens to many women, insomnia was one of the hardest parts of the pregnancy. There were nights when I simply couldn't sleep, and I would lie there listening to tales of the night until sleep finally got the better of me. When my baby was born, that routine changed. I stopped listening to horror stories at night because I was looking for anything that might help him sleep better. Reading online, I found information about white noise, and on Spotify I discovered a channel with tracks of almost 3 hours that no longer exists. I made a playlist with several of them, and from then on every night I did the exact same thing. Around 10 o'clock I would start the playlist, connect my phone to the smart speaker in the room, and leave the volume very low so the white noise would play through the night. My baby and I would sleep peacefully, and when we woke up around 7 in the morning, the playlist would still be going without any issue. We went on like that for several months. One ordinary night I put my son to bed, started the white noise as usual, and fell asleep. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up suddenly. The first thing I did was check the time. I remember clearly that it was 3:20 in the morning, but it wasn't my baby who woke me up. It was Uriel's voice. Coming from the speaker in the room, one of the stories was playing, clearly audible and much louder than the volume I always left the white noise at. I picked up my phone, still half asleep, and opened Spotify. The white noise playlist was no longer playing. Without my having touched anything at all, a Tales of the Night episode was on. I remember the cover image perfectly. It was a picture of a child standing and peering out from what looked like a door or a window. I even took a screenshot because I knew nobody would believe me when I told them, but I figured it was just a Spotify glitch. I turned off the episode and lay back down. That was when the thing that truly frightened me happened. Just as I was drifting off again, somewhere between sleep and waking, I heard the crying of a child. Not a neighbor's child, not an older kid. The strange thing is that Any mother knows perfectly well how to recognize the sound of her own baby's cry. And I did, even though mine wasn't yet old enough to sound quite like that. I opened my eyes immediately and looked toward where he was sleeping. He was still sleeping soundly, hadn't even moved. The crying was gone. I didn't wake my husband. I chose to convince myself it had been a dream and managed to fall back asleep. But in the morning, I opened Spotify. The episode was still paused exactly where I had stopped it in the middle of the night. Curiosity got the better of fear, and I decided to play it from the beginning. I had never heard it before. As I listened, the story began to send a chill through me. It was about a woman who began hearing the crying of a child, exactly what had happened to me just hours before. Then I saw the title of the episode, The Child in the Wall. To this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. Maybe Spotify had some kind of error. Maybe it was a coincidence too specific to be a coincidence. I don't know. All I know is that my son is 4 years old now. I'm pregnant with my second baby, and even though I still listen to Tales of the Night, I now prefer to do it only while there is still daylight. Thank you very much for listening. And if you're hearing this story at night, be careful. I hope you can get some rest, and that nothing strange happens.